this seminar. My name is Peter Godfrey, I'm a journalist and author. I'm really pleased to welcome you to the Guildford Literature Festival and also to this special event with Dan Lepard, who's the doyen of baking, really, around the world, actually. He's written many a book. You know him as a columnist as well. He's also a fine photographer. His new book is called Short and Sweet, The Best of Home Baking. And I haven't just discovered upstairs that it's got this extra little thing, which you may have noticed already if you've got it, which it just opens and doesn't close over when you do the recipe. How clever is that? It's really, I mean, and the production of the book, it seems to me that you probably take a very close interest in that, partly because you're a photographer by training or by were a professional photographer, so that's part of it, but also the look of the book, did you play a big part in that?
Yes, I suppose I did, but I think as all authors, they want people to like their book, and I think liking a cookbook involves lots of different things, like the it falling open really neatly. I like having photos in books, but not so many photos that you can't explain things. So we think we struck a good balance. Say about just under half the recipes have photographs, but in doing it that way, it meant that we could explain more. The colours, I wanted it to be a cookbook that looked pretty in the kitchen, or just looked like something that was an attractive part of the kitchen. Things like that. I'll usually make each recipe 3 times before I've got it right. Then again, for the book, if there were substantial changes to a recipe, I might make it twice or 3 times again. So they were tested that way. They were also tested. Readers would send us in changes that they suggest about it, or ideas that they had, or queries, or difficulties. One thing I found for The Guardian is that there's a technique used in making what used to be called a classic sponge cake, where you beat the egg yolks and the sugar together and then take egg whites and fold them through. And loads of people found this impossible. I'm still surprised about this, but it made me realise that there are some techniques that we really need to go back over. Gently folding egg white through a cake mixture is clearly a technique that's still a problem for some people. People would write to me and say, but you've left the baking powder out. How's it going to rise? I tried it and it came out like a pancake. So that made us realise that we needed to explain things thoroughly. And I think I feel I've ended up with the book that I wanted when I started. And I think there's always that personal aspect to writing a book. You kind of want the book that reassures you that it's a good thing.
I mean, it sort of seems to me that for Australians, travelling to Europe is a kind of rite of passage that not everybody obviously, but a lot of people do it. Had you always expected that you would go to Europe to kind of discover what you wanted to do?
Yes, I expected, and I think my family expected that I'd come to Europe, but they also expected I'd come back. I got the sense when I was growing up that you were meant to go overseas, get experience, but dislike it, and then return to Australia and think, I'm glad I'm back here. I remember when I got my British passport, and it was my first. I'd moved here in about '84. It was my first trip out of the UK, and when I returned at customs, they said, "Welcome back, sir." And I thought, this is my home. This is my home here. What you want with a wet dough is for the same thing to happen, for the yeast to gas the mixture, and at that point it changes from being runny to being shapeable. But in the same way that we talked about the loaf rising and collapsing, the same thing happens on a wet dough, but even faster. So you have to watch for 2 things. One, that you can't shape the dough until the dough is gassed, because it won't hold its shape. But you must also bake it before it starts to fall back in upon itself, because then it runs again. So it only has this window in the middle where it will hold its gas. So again, going back to this risen by half, it absolutely works with wet dough. The other thing to do you fold the dough at all? If you try this, is that a step you know? No. Okay. Well, when you go back to it, actually, I'll try, if I get around to it, I'll try and do a video about this, and we'll put it on Amazon. And have a look. When the dough begins to get bubbles in it, if you spread some olive oil, you could use flour, but olive oil is perhaps easier with any sunflower oil, on the worktop. Tip the dough out onto it and fold it in upon itself in thirds as if you're making puff pastry. Do you know that? You'll find the little air bubbles inside will elongate, and that stretching of them then allows them to grow into bigger bubbles. So this pulling of the dough back upon itself will turn this runny dough into a much firmer, almost sort of jelly-like mixture that does shape really easily. So, you know, when the time comes for you to try it again one day, yeah, do try that.
Okay.